Begotten is a movie that's reached near mythical status amongst hardcore horror crowds. It's still considered to be one of the most terrifying pieces of art ever created. Yet almost no one I know personally has ever even heard it exists.
This is the vision of one man, E. Elias Merridge. It was originally supposed to be a horror-based theatre production with lavish sets and dance routines, but was considered far too expensive to pull off, so they decided to make it into a film. Even after it was made, it took years to find a distributor willing to send it out, because it was so hard to market or even categorize into a specific genre. Instead, he would get laughed at because people just didn't understand what the hell they were watching. He became very protective of the film, and then when 2 distributors did show interest, he turned them down for not being a right fit. That was, until it wound up in the hands of film critics who recognised its brilliance and helped it eventually get a theatrical release. Susan Sontag was the main supporter, bringing it to festivals for showings, proclaiming it to be a masterpiece to the audience. It couldn't get any form of proper theatrical release, but was brought all over the place for one-off screenings. You remember that episode of The Office where Gabe shared his weird horror movies he makes? Well, imagine if that had a full-fledged release.
The cinema of the unsettling is a growing film movement.
There's quite a few YouTube films out there that's like this, but you have to remember, this was filmed in the mid-80s and didn't get released until 1989. Back then, there was nothing like this.
Physical VHSs were so rare due to its limited release that bootleg copies are actually estimated to outnumber the official releases. It's super hard to find a copy, and online it goes for ridiculous prices. Look at this guy on Reddit I found. He paid $75 for a VHS, which is considered a bargain considering another one he found was going to be $300. Luckily though, some generous criminal uploaded the full thing on YouTube, which is where I was able to see it. Talking about the plot is pretty much pointless, since it's an experimental film that doesn't have a clearly explainable narrative. The only thing certain is the contents are extreme, with the movie being bathed in graphic violence and sexual content. When I first watched it, I believed it was showing the life of some poor being and its torturous life cycle in some hellscape reality far from what we know, or maybe a visualization of a soul cursed to hell. Then once the film finished, I saw the characters were named God killing himself, Mother Earth, and Son of Earth, Flesh on Bone. That completely changed my perception I had of certain scenes, and made me rewatch it with a fresh new perspective in mind.
The film doesn't contain any spoken dialogue. He perceived it as a time that predated spoken language, where communication was made via empirical reasoning alone.
It looks like a videotape that was found in the lowest circle of hell. The picture's never clear, it seems burned or decayed, the frame rate constantly fluctuates, and there's many instances you aren't quite sure what you're looking at, you just know it's nothing pleasant. It reminded me of the early films of Georges Méliès, or even early German expressionist films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Only if those films were chewed up and spat out by some demon spawn. The director said he was aiming to ape the aged look of these early films, but go even further. He wanted something that looked like it was from the times of Christ, or as he says, as if it were a cinematic Dead Sea Scroll that had been buried in the sands, a remnant of a culture with customs and rites that no longer apply to this culture, yet we are somewhere underneath it, under the surface of what we call reality. I mean, Jesus. The soundscape is intense. At times, it's like you're constantly in nature, yet with strange noises piercing in from another world. Then, at others, you feel like you're a victim with guttural spluttering in your ears from a life form that isn't comfortable existing.
It doesn't conform to ordinary narrative or genre conventions. To a casual audience, it doesn't even reflect what they would understand as a traditional movie.
For many people, it will just be seen as a mix of random, ugly visuals, seemingly without purpose or only minute relation. But for others, these aspects are what make it so intriguing. It's open to interpretation and conjures up a variety of emotions depending on the person watching. The whole movie is like watching a nightmare come to life. The way things move, the vague deformed look to the world and entities. It's truly a frightening looking movie. There was a ton of times I was like, damn, that's terrifying. Like it could be used as a picture to a famous creepypasta legend, yet the whole film is bursting with these visuals. The way the director achieved this was by processing it intensely through an optical printer. He didn't have one of them, so he just built one himself. That's commitment to your art. This process basically removed all grey midtones for the most part. Due to this, every minute of film took 8 to 10 hours to develop. If there was a mistake, you had to start all over again. It's way too inaccessible for it to have ever gained any mainstream appeal. It's an avant-garde movie, and comes with all the usual trappings that experimental genre can bring. It's hard to understand. There's no sound except for weird noises that don't always match the video. It is arguably more style than substance. It's pretentiously edgy. And though initially compelling, I'll admit, at times it can be flat out boring, as you just watch various cruel acts happen to people for over an hour.
When I was watching it alone in the darkness of my room with headphones on, I definitely looked around nervous a few times. The film just has that effect if you watch it in the right context.
Is it a masterpiece? I think it's hard to argue it's not. Look at the legacy it's left, the amount of iconic things it's influenced. If you're a rock fan, you'll probably recognise the visuals in other works. Marilyn Manson was such a fan, he hired him to do a bunch of his music videos. Other famous people in the business loved it so much that they advocated for him to work on other films. Nicolas Cage pushed for him to be the director of Shadow of the Vampire after seeing it, and then that came out to critical acclaim. Some sequences even used similar processing techniques as in Begotten. People still dissect and debate its contents to this day. The more I read and learn about the film, the more I fall in love with it. And yes, you can argue how the film is made and the production around it is better than the final product itself. This video could have been hours longer if I went over every single thing that really makes this film unique, and I highly recommend checking out interviews with the director himself and his journey creating it. It's incredible.
In the end, I think there's two types of people that will watch this. Those who love it to death and see it as an intense work of art, and those who'll get bored within 10 minutes and just see it as some needless scenes of gross violence. And neither opinion is wrong.